Welcome to the Sweet Science by Smitty podcast. This is boxing commentary from a fan's perspective. Coming to you from springtime finally here in the Northeast, in Northwest New Jersey, on this 7th day of April 2015. And there is so much to talk to you about the world of boxing. Again, this stretch of 2 months coming up is one of the best 2-month stretch that I can remember in boxing history. And there really is so much to talk about. I actually ordered the Big Knockout Boxing pay-per-view this past weekend, so I want to kind of touch on that at the start of this podcast. But we have a lot of fights to go through. We had the PBC and CBS and the Stevenson-Bika Light Heavyweight Championship, and we've got the PBC and NBC this weekend with the Garcia Peterson fight, and we've got a lot of fights coming up next weekend. This is the last podcast for 2 weeks, so I'm going to touch upon the fight of the year, which everyone thinks it's going to be Matthysse and Provodnikov. That's on April 18th. And then we'll go round by round to a few news items. But let's get started with the Big Knockout Boxing. So I spent the $30 on Saturday night for the Big Knockout Boxing to check it out. I was intrigued by it with the different kind of rule changes. There's 2-minute rounds. It's a 7-round fight for a championship, a 5-round fight for a non-championship. And in the beginning, I sort of was okay with it. It was kind of different. It was kind of new. I thought that it would be something interesting. And then as the night soured, I kind of soured on it as the night went on because I didn't get any big knockouts. So I paid $30 and I'm promised big knockouts because that's the name. And all I got were decisions. And so none of those fights, they could have all been done in the middle of a regular boxing ring. So I was pretty turned off on it by the time that the main event finished. And in the main event, it was Curtis Stevens and Gabe Rosado. You know, 2 contenders that we've seen in middleweight fights. They both obviously lost to Golovkin. But then they're contenders. When they get up to the title shot, they come up short. But they are known names to boxing fans and in the middleweights. So I would have watched it if it was and been intrigued if it was in a regular boxing ring. If it was the undercard to Stevenson-Bika, I would have watched it and would have been interested in it. So I checked out the Big Knockout Boxing, and again, there was no big knockouts. Now Stevens did knock Rosado down, but he didn't get the decision. It was a draw. I thought Stevens clearly won, but it ended up a draw. The one judge had Stevens up by a few rounds, which I thought was an accurate score, but the other ones both had it as a draw. So the fight ended in a draw. So it was a little bit unsatisfying to watch this and to watch something new and then see a decision draw. So I kind of skeptical of sort of the how this is going to last, if this has any legs, which I'm not sure it does. I think it's kind of gimmicky. I don't think a lot of the real fighters, the title fighters, the champions. I read somewhere that they tried to get Golovkin, and Golovkin turned it down, which was definitely the best decision. So you might get these guys like the Rosados and Curtis Stevens, these sort of fringe contenders who have a little bit of a name, have fought guys with names, but kind of come up short. And, you know, they could probably make a decent payday. I thought the paydays, I'm not really quite sure what the payday numbers were, but I thought they actually got paid pretty well to do this. So there's always that. But it was a little hard to kind of judge each round because it is only 2 minutes. So there isn't a big body of work per round to kind of judge on it. So, you know, the pit itself was kind of cool. Especially I assume that if you were there in the arena, it probably works pretty well because the sight lines are much better than a ring, whereas the ring is up in the air when you're sitting, especially if you're sitting on the floor, you're sort of looking up, and then you've got the corners and you've got the ropes in your way. Having this sort of pit where the fans are looking down on it with no ropes probably created some good sight lines. So it was probably a good seat to watch this type of boxing in the arena. And as far as coming across at home, you know, in the beginning I was kind of cool with it because it was different, it was interesting. I don't know if it was because it was new or if I just opened up a bottle of Patron tequila, so I don't know which one was it. Was the tequila by the end of the night, or if it was just the decisions and no real big knockouts that kind of soured me on it. But we'll see if they're going to plan another one. You know, I think they had one last year. They've got one this year. let's see if they do another one later in the year. I don't know if I would tune in. I had the fights on the big screen, and then I had the Wisconsin-Kentucky game on my computer, so I was kind of watching both at the same time. We'll see. I don't know what the numbers were for the pay-per-view. I can look that up and talk about that next time, but I'd be curious to see how many people actually bought it. I'm sure it wasn't that many, especially with the Final Four being on the same night. I doubt a lot of even boxing fans even spent $30 to watch big knockout boxing. So we'll see if there's any room in combat sports for this big knockout boxing. I don't think so. I think it's sort of going to be a fad, and you might see another one or two shows, but I think it'll fade away. I don't think they're going to make any money on it. I think it's owned by DirecTV, and I just don't see it making a lot of money. I don't see them getting bigger names than Stevens or Rosado, and so I doubt that it actually lasts. So let's talk about the PBC on CBS, and we had two decent fights. It was both light heavyweights, and in the first fight, it was Artur Beterbiev against Gabriel Campillo, and Beterbiev looks like a really good contender here, and he's got that amateur pedigree that a lot of the Eastern European fighters are coming over with once they cross over into the professionals. And he's being brought along really fast. I believe he's only got 8 or 9 professional fights, but he looks like he's ready to fight the top guys. And in the light heavyweights, it's a great division because you have Stevenson, who's the champ, and then you have got Kovalev, who's widely recognized as being the number one guy. So they're headed for a showdown, hopefully, sometime later in the year. And then you got this Beterbiev lurking sort of in the background, waiting for his chance to get at the winner of that fight. And he just looked really sharp. And I don't know if it was a lot to do with how he was fighting or that Campillo was shot. Campillo's been in a lot of battles. He's fought a lot of top competition. I think he's got 7 losses now. He looked a little shot. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but Beterbiev looks like the real deal. He's, technically sound just like all those Eastern European fighters are, and he's got big time power too. So it's a fun division, especially when all 3 guys that look like they're the top 3 guys, when they all have power. Because Stevenson's got it in his left hand, Kovalev's got it in both his hands, and Beterbiev looks like he's got it in both his hands too. So it's fun when the top 3 guys are all going to be big punchers. He took Campillo out early in this fight. He was all over him, and he had some good sportsmanship too, because after he knocked him out against the ropes, he saw that he had knocked him out. He threw a left that kind of he was pulling back on, so it hit him pretty good, but he could have really sat down on that punch and laid Campillo out and really could have hurt him. And he kind of was pulling back on the left, and then he walked away. Campillo, the way he fell, he was still there to be hit. He could have come back with another right, but it was good to see that he recognized that he was already out. He didn't need to hit him anymore, and that was going to be the end of the fight. So they showed a lot of discipline in that moment by not, hitting him with another right or even hitting him with that left with full power, which I thought was impressive. A lot of guys wouldn't have been able to pull back and be that disciplined. They would have gone in there with 2 more shots to really take him out, and they could have seriously hurt Campillo. So hopefully that didn't happen. And I think that just shows a lot about this young fighter, and that even though he's only got a few fights professionally, all his amateur experience sort of paid off right there. And he's mentioned that he's beaten Kovalev in the amateurs in the past. I don't know. I mean, I don't think I've seen too much of Kovalev talking about that, but that's going to be an interesting fight down the road if Kovalev beats Stevenson and then those 2 guys fight, especially with their history that Beterbiev is talking about in terms of beating him in the amateurs. So that's going to be something to look forward to. The light heavyweights is an exciting division. There's so many great divisions. The featherweights, the welterweights. It's unbelievable how much talent there is in boxing right now in 2015. And the next 2 months are going to be so great. So let's talk about Stevenson and Bika. And the fight didn't go exactly the way I thought. I thought Bika was going to be able to rough Stevenson up a little bit more, and he really didn't go that way. He kind of stayed in the center of the ring. He kind of boxed, and he just got picked apart. And Stevenson hit him whenever he wanted to. And he was just lining up that left hand with, he kind of paws at you with the jab, and then he gets you, and then he comes in with the left. And he was doing that all night. And Bika, near the end of the fight, Bika started to do what I thought he was going to do earlier, and that was try to get him up against the ropes and then do some infighting, rough him up a little bit. And, Bika's known to throw some elbows, his head. He didn't really do too much of that, although there were moments when he clipped Stevenson with his head. And even at the end, he clipped him. And I think Stevenson got a cut that he needs stitches for. But near the end, he had him cornered off against the ropes, was doing some good work. But I needed him to do that earlier. And he sort of stayed in the middle of the ring and was just on the edge of that left hand from Stevenson. And so by having that type of game plan, that wasn't going to work. Stevenson is a very athletic guy. He's kind of one-dimensional with that left hand, even though it's a great left hand. And it's one of the best left hands in all of boxing. But, that's kind of all he does. There isn't much with the right hand. So, a fighter like Kovalev who can punch with both hands and is a little bit craftier might be able to solve the riddle that Stevenson is. But I think that Stevenson did what he had to do. He was in there with a hard-nosed veteran, a guy that likes to rough things up, and he did a great job. And he knocked Bika down. And, Bika's, not someone who has ever been knocked out before. And even though Stevenson didn't get the knockout, he did show that he's got that power. He took down a hard-nosed guy like Bika and put him on the canvas, which not a lot of people have been able to do. And so I think he did what he needed to do in terms of winning this fight and then looking ahead to Kovalev. And that's the fight that everybody wants to see. I think that's one of the best fights that needs to be made for boxing now that Pacquiao and Mayweather's been made. And Stevenson has that great support in Canada. And it seems like the Canadians are great boxing fans. It just looks like there's a great atmosphere there. This one was in Quebec City, but I know he's fought a lot in Montreal as well. And it just looks like the fans there get boxing. They're a really intelligent crowd. And it seems like they're really into it. And they put on a good production in terms of the music in between the rounds. Looks like a fun place to watch a fight. I'd love to be able to get up there one of these days to see a fight up in Quebec or Montreal. As far as the PBC on CBS and the production went, I thought it was okay. I think that they're getting better as we see more production, even though we've been on a couple channels now, NBC, Spike TV, and now CBS. Kevin Harlan, I thought did okay. There's been some criticism again that he missed a lot. And these guys who don't call boxing are going to miss a lot. They don't have the nuances of calling a game. Whenever there was the World Cup a few years ago, I forget what the announcer's name was, but he was a baseball guy and he was calling the World Cup games. And the soccer fans got crazy because they just don't understand the nuances. The soccer fans get crazy with Gus Johnson calling soccer. Gus Johnson is a great announcer. He has a lot of passion for the sport. He does a great job with the NCAA tournament, and he's also done a great job of football. But each sport has their own nuance, and if you're not used to it, if you're not covering it on a yearly basis, it's kind of tough to pick up and satisfy the hardcore base of fans. So it's just like boxing. These guys aren't calling boxing. This isn't their full-time gig. They've been asked to come in because of their name recognition. And maybe people don't know Harlan as much as they know Marv Albert, but they've heard his voice before on basketball and football. So again, when you hear a voice that you've heard before in other sports, it just lends credibility to the sport. So someone who saw boxing on in the afternoon on a Saturday, flipped it on, heard Kevin Harlan, and was like, oh, I recognize that guy. This should be something that I need to pay attention to. They might not have known who Stevenson was or Bika was, but they were like, oh, okay, Kevin Harlan's calling it. It's on CBS, middle of the afternoon. Let me check it out. And that's how you're going to draw in the new fans. So again, I get exactly why they're getting these play-by-play guys. Again, but yeah, he missed some things. By the end, he sort of gave up on actually describing blow by blow, but that's okay. I'm watching the fight. I can see that it's a left hook. I don't need Kevin Harlan to tell me it's a left hook. I can see it. So I don't need the play-by-play to sort of micromanage the call. You need to just set up your color guys, and when the big shots hit or when the knockdowns hit, be able to reflect it in your voice and in your emotion. The other times you should just be kicking it over to your analyst to try to let them tell you what really is going on and what the strategy is of the fight and sort of what each fighter's trying to do. And obviously, Paulie Malignaggi is one of my favorites, so he's always solid. And Virgil Hunter was very good too, but they need to turn his mic up. He was very hard to hear, or he was mumbling. He has a lot of good points, I believe, and he's a world-class trainer. But I think they just got to work on him on announcing. I'll give him a total pass if that's the first time he's ever done it, because I've never heard Virgil Hunter talk on a boxing broadcast. So I'll give him a pass that first time, but they need to kind of turn up his mic or get him to sort of make sure he speaks clearer, because I think he's got a lot of good things to say, but sometimes it was tough for the viewer at home to actually hear it. But I thought the three of them actually had some pretty decent chemistry for the first time working together. I thought they kind of went back and forth really well in terms of talking about the technical part of boxing. And with Paulie Malignaggi breaks it down very great in terms of the technicality of actually being in the ring. And then you have Virgil Hunter as a trainer who's going to see things on a technical side anyway. The fans watching that CBS broadcast and any future CBS broadcasts, I mean, they're in for a treat in terms of learning the ins and outs of boxing from a trainer's perspective and from a fighter's perspective, because I think those two guys have a lot to add, and they're going to teach the fans a lot about exactly what it's like to be in the ring. So I thought that they did a pretty good job at tweaking things. And again, this time when the fighters actually walked into the ring, they didn't have the Hans Zimmer theme. They actually let the fighters pick their own music. I think Bika came into a Bob Marley song, and Adonis Stevenson in the beginning had the Superman theme, which was pretty cool, and then it turned into some other song. But I think that they heard that the fighters didn't like it either. The fighters, that's part of their personality. That's part of their uniqueness, is the music that they have to walk into the ring. So I think they realized they couldn't take that away from the fighters. So we'll see what happens this weekend on NBC if they let the fighters use their own music. I hope so, because that's one of the critiques I had that kind of made the whole production a little bit stale on the first PBC on NBC, the Guerrero-Thurman fight, was that they had the Hans Zimmer theme. And so I think they heard from the fans, I think they heard from the fighters that this was something that they didn't like, and they made the tweak. So that's good. That shows that they're being flexible. So hopefully moving forward, if there's some other things that need to be tweaked, we at least now know that they're open and willing to continue. Like, this is a work in progress for them, and they're going to continue to try to make the best product they can by listening to the feedback from the fans and from the fighters. So that was very positive that they did that. So let's look forward to the fights coming up this weekend on April, I believe it's the 12th. And so it's the Garcia, Lamont Peterson, and you got Andy Lee and Peter Quillen. So the Lee Quillen fight is an interesting fight, because I think it's a 50-50 fight. And in boxing, there really isn't that many 50-50 fights. It's usually a favorite and an underdog. And if you look at any of the betting lines at Vegas, you rarely see anything that's that close. It's always a favorite, always an underdog. And maybe that's part of the charm of the sport is the underdog, the sort of the Rocky theme, so to speak, is that when you are watching a fight, there's always a prohibitive favorite and there's always the underdog. And if you get behind the underdog and he's doing well in the fight, that's something that you can stick with. That's something that you can start rooting for. And then you can kind of endear yourself to that underdog and sort of become a fan of that fighter. This one has, even though Quillen is favored in the fight, this one has a little bit of 50-50, and I think that's because of Lee's power. And Andy Lee can catch you with a shot. He keeps his power through the whole fight as well. He can hit you with a shot, even if he's getting beat or beat up or just getting outboxed. You're always going to have to respect his power. And he showed that in his last fight against Korobov. And I think that the way and Quillen's, I believe, is going to win the fight. I believe he's going to win a unanimous decision. But it's going to be one of those fights where you're going to have to stay with it the whole time, because Lee is always going to be there. He's always going to be throwing big shots, and you're not going to know if he's going to be able to connect with one of those shots. So you're going to have to stick with the fight the whole time. But I do think Quillen's got enough boxing skills to win the fight and to win a decision, and he'll be fighting in his hometown of Brooklyn. So I think that the edge would go to Quillen, and he is the favorite, I believe, in Vegas. But again, if you're going to put any money on a dog this weekend, I would put it on Andy Lee because of that punching power and because he's done it before and he's never out of the fight. He's got confidence in that power all the way through the end of the fight. And I think that that's probably a decent bet if you're a betting person to go with Andy Lee as an underdog. But that should be a good first fight on the card this weekend. And then the main event is Danny Garcia. Garcia, I've already mentioned, is one of my favorites. He's a Philly guy. When me and my friends, we went down to see the Matthysse Peterson fight 2 years ago. We ran into Danny Garcia. He took a picture with my friend. Couldn't have been more gracious, more kind. I met his father, Angel Garcia. He was up getting a hot dog and a beer or soda, and I saw him and I shook his hand and said hi to him. Couldn't have been a nicer guy. So, we've always sort of rooted for Danny because we met him and just thought he was a good guy. And he was there taking pictures of anybody who wanted to come up to him and take a picture. He was willing to take a picture with. So he was that kind of friendly kind of guy and humble guy in terms of, meeting and greeting with the fans. This fight is really interesting because, Lamont Peterson does have the skills and the boxing ability to win this fight. If you remember the Garcia-Khan fight, Khan was pretty much dominating Garcia for the first few rounds until Garcia caught him. And if Peterson does that and he stays to boxing, he probably can keep up. And he could probably win a lot of rounds and be in this fight all the way. But the thing with Peterson is I don't know if he can do that. Peterson at some point always throws his game plan out the window, and then he likes to sit there too long and trade and stay in the pocket. And if he does that, Danny Garcia's left hook, he's going to catch him. And, Peterson's jaw is a little suspect. We saw that with Matthysse. And so I think that if Peterson throws out the game plan of trying to use his quickness to outbox Garcia, he's going to get caught. And I think that's just the nature of who Lamont Peterson is. I don't think we're going to see a disciplined fight for 12 rounds where he uses his speed, his quickness, and his technical boxing ability to outbox Danny Garcia. I think at some point, maybe round 4, round 5, he's gonna get hit with something by Garcia, and then the game plan is gonna go out the window. Then he's gonna try to brawl with him and out punch him, and that's when Garcia, I think, is gonna catch him. So I think Garcia is gonna win this fight. I'd say he knocks Peterson out somewhere 7, 8 rounds, somewhere in that area. But it'll be an interesting fight for as long as it lasts. And, Danny Garcia, he's fought a lot in Brooklyn already. So I expect a pretty good crowd. And since he's from Philly, I expect a lot of Danny Garcia fans. Although Lamont Peterson's from Washington. And when I was in Atlantic City for the Peterson Matthysse, there were a lot of Lamont Peterson fans in Atlantic City. So he's got a pretty good following himself in terms of the boxing fans in Washington. So it's definitely something to check out this weekend. We'll definitely see how NBC tweaks their production. We'll see if Marv Albert has grown a little bit over the past month. Maybe he's done some more research on these fighters and the boxers. And so we'll see how they do. Let's hope that they come into their own music, and we'll see how some of the tweaks are made. And we'll critique on that on the next podcast. One other thing before I move on to the next topic was on CBS as well, was the guy who did the interview at the end of the fight. He never asked Stevenson about Kovalev. And that's the only question that you have to ask in that spot. You have to ask him, do you want Sergey Kovalev in your next fight? Just point blank, right there. And the guy never did it. First of all, the guy called the Bika Stevenson an epic fight. So, I don't know why the guy was using such hyperbole, but it just was a terrible interview. I know if Merchant was there or Jim Gray was there, we would have gotten the question, do you want to fight Sergey Kovalev, and do you want that to be your next fight? That's all you had to ask him. But then my theory is that since this is a PBC time buy, these guys, maybe they're not even allowed to ask what they want to ask. I have no idea. Maybe these questions that were given to this guy, I don't recall the guy's name. I think he's on CBS Sportsnet, but I can't remember his name. Maybe they're given the questions and it's all scripted and he can't go off script because it's a PBC time buy. So I'm not really quite sure what that interview was for, but you got to ask the question. It's so obvious. You have to ask him, do you want to fight Sergey Kovalev? And we'll see Stevenson. He says he wants to fight him, but then all his actions say he doesn't. So again, it looks like it's in pretty good shape for that fight to be made, but I'm not going to hold my breath until I see them actually in the ring together. Another thing about the PBC on CBS that I forgot about was that in between the rounds, they didn't really go to many commercials. They had a couple commercials. I think I saw one for Toyota, but for the most part, they were just doing fighter profiles of other PBC fighters. So they showed Garcia, they showed Peterson. I believe they showed one of the Durrell brothers. I can't remember if it was Andre or Anthony. They showed Errol Spence. They showed Omar Figueroa. And so I thought this was actually a really good idea at first when I saw it, because I thought that the casual fan tuning in, now they're going to start to see a little bit of the backstories of these fighters and see some of their personality. But I think they might have overdone it a little bit, because I think we saw Danny Garcia's profile like 15 times. So by the 15th time, I think you're starting to get a little annoyed at it, almost like they're pushing it down your throat a little bit. So if they had done it 3 or 4 times, I think they had one for Deontay Wilder I saw. If they did it only like 3 or 4 times per fighter, I think that would have worked. To push each fighter so many times, I think it was a little bit overkill. And I think people might start getting a little bit annoyed at, okay, I get it. I get Danny Garcia's story, or this is the 10th time I've seen Deontay Wilder. So I think maybe they need to just do a few promos of each fighter, but maybe give us some more. I mean, he's got 200 fighters. There's got to be more fighters that he could have profiled in that spot on CBS than just the handful that he did, and kind of spread it out a little bit more. But the idea of it, of showcasing those fighters instead of going to commercials, since it's a time buy anyway, I thought that's a really smart move, because you really do need to get these fighters, their profiles out there to the casual fan if you're going to sell even the other PBCs on the other networks. So I thought that was a really good idea. And one other thing about CBS, sorry that I jumped around to NBC and now going back to CBS, but one of the fights that I think would be a nice fight for the light heavyweights while we wait for Kovalev and Stevenson would be Beterbiev versus Pascal. Now, Beterbiev, I'm sorry, is located now. He's from Eastern Europe, but now he's located in Montreal. So I don't see why, unless there's some promotional politics that I just don't know yet, that why we couldn't see that fight. I think that's a great fight. You know, we know who Pascal is, and this Beterbiev. Let's see what he's got against Pascal. Let's see if he is ready for Kovalev and Stevenson, because he's not going to get either of them next, I don't believe, especially if they're going to try to fight each other. So while we're waiting for Kovalev-Stevenson, let's see Beterbiev versus Pascal. It's perfect. Stick it on the undercard of Stevenson and Kovalev. That makes perfect sense to me. You put that on the undercard, because the Kovalev-Stevenson's fight is going to be in Montreal or Quebec, but most likely Montreal. I think you can get a bigger crowd in Montreal. So then you put Beterbiev and Pascal on the undercard. That is an amazing card in an amazing city with 3 fighters that sort of call Montreal home. I think that makes all the sense in the world. Do it in the fall, do it in October. I think that's something we're really going to look forward to if that comes off. So let's jump ahead to April 18th, since I won't be putting out a podcast for 2 weeks. So let's just preview a little bit what goes on April 18th. And this is just going to show you how much boxing we have as fans. You have to love this. How much boxing we have in the next 2 weeks, because you've got the Terence Crawford, Thomas Delorme fight, which I think is a sneaky good fight. Not a lot of people are talking about this fight, but I think it's a sneaky good one. Then obviously it's going to get overshadowed by Matthysse Provodnikov, which obviously is going to be one of the fights of the year. It has to be. It can only be great, right? It can't be a boring dance fest. It's going to be an amazing fight. And this is the fight that I wish was on NBC or on CBS, because, you know, the casual fan sees this, and I think now you've got them hooked on boxing, because they need to see a war and a battle. It's going to be a bloodbath. And if they saw that on NBC, that's the type of fight that brings in fans, because it's all action, but it's going to be on HBO, and I'll touch upon that in a second. But the reason why this is such a great 2-month stretch is that on that same night on Showtime is Chavez versus Fonfara, which is a decent fight, but you can see how much boxing there is when Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. is sort of pushed to the background. So it's an unbelievable stretch. That's a decent fight. Fonfara has shown that he can handle himself at light heavyweight. He did it against Stevenson, knocking Stevenson down, and we talked about that in the last podcast. that's how much boxing we have. Where Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. sort of the backstory, especially on that night of Matthysse and Provodnikov. I don't know why Showtime put Chavez Jr. on that night. He should have had his own night because it is going to get overshadowed by Matthysse and Provodnikov. Now, if you're a hardcore boxing fan like I am and like you are, we know how we do it. We DVR the one, we watch the other, and we go back and forth on the DVR. And you stay away from Twitter if you don't want to hear what the results are. So let's talk about the Terence Crawford-Thomas Dulorme fight, which again I think is a sneaky good fight. And so Terence Crawford's going to be moving up in weight to 140 to fight for, I think it's the WBO vacant super lightweight, junior welterweight. I just call it 140. And he's fighting Thomas Dulorme, who Thomas Dulorme was a rising prospect contender until he lost to the Argentinian kid, Breu. And then he's had a couple wins, 4 or 5 wins in a row. And so I think this is a decent fight. I mean, this is Crawford's first step up to 140, and we'll see how he fares. Obviously, he's, a pound for pound type fighter, so I would definitely expect him to win. But I mean, I don't think it's going to be as easy as some people think it is. Obviously, Crawford's camp picked Dulorme because they thought it would be a good jump into 140. But I still think Dulorme's got some skills and shouldn't be just, washed over just because he had that one loss and his star has faded a little bit. And, he was supposed to be like the next big guy from Puerto Rico. And then he had the loss and it seemed like people soured on him. But I'm be interested to see how he fights, and definitely Crawford at this weight. Garcia is the champion at 140 after this fight with Peterson, which is really being fought at 143. He's moving up, so he's going to be out. So there's going to be a definite opening at 140 for Terence Crawford. And then on the same note, when we talk about Matthysse and Provodnikov, they're 140 as well. They're fighting on HBO. I know Matthysse is Golden Boy, but now he's got fights on HBO. Crawford is Top Rank. So it definitely looks like HBO is trying to get Crawford to fight the winner of Matthysse and Provodnikov, if the winner of Matthysse and Provodnikov could ever fight again. Because that's the kind of war that I expect Matthysse and Provodnikov is going to be, because both guys come at it. They're both coming in to take your head off, and it's going to be an unbelievable fight. But I really think there's a clear winner in this fight, and my prediction is Provodnikov, because that guy is an absolute animal. And I know he lost to Algieri, even though I thought that he still won the fight. He had the knockdowns in the first round. I still thought that he did enough in that fight to get that decision. I thought that was a gift decision for Algieri. And I thought that Provodnikov did enough and should have won that. Now, we've seen Matthysse. I was there in Atlantic City a couple years ago when he fought Peterson. And then he had his fight against Garcia. And Garcia, stepped up to him and, wasn't going to be bullied, and even knocked Matthysse down, if you remember, and won that decision, even though it was a really close fight. But Garcia was the right winner. Matthysse got all that power. And, from what I've been reading, he's saying that he's going to want to try to box Provodnikov. Provodnikov doesn't know how to box. He's just going to come in like he always does, with aggression and forward, and he doesn't care if he gets hit. You can hit him with everything you have, and it doesn't matter to him because he's going to get his, and he's going to try to hurt you, and it doesn't matter how many times he gets hit. That's the kind of animal Provodnikov is. And I think that type of fighter is going to wear down Matthysse. I think Matisse's best shot is to maybe try to box a little bit, because I think he obviously can do it better than Provodnikov. But I think Matisse's true nature is going to want to brawl, and he's going to want to fight. He's going to want to just exchange punches. And I think if he gets into that, I think that's where he's going to make a big mistake, because that's what Provodnikov wants. He wants you to hit him. Hit him as hard as you want. He doesn't care. And I think with that mentality, Matthysse is going to get carried away with, okay, he's right there. Let me take him out, because I know Matthysse believes in his power, and he very well might, get some good shots in, but Provodnikov seems to have a steel chin. So I just can't see any way that Matthysse is going to hurt Provodnikov, even if he is going to be landing some big shots. Provodnikov will then just, because it's so discouraging, because you're going to be hitting him with everything you have, all this power that you would have knocked out other guys, but yet here's the 8th round, 9th round. Even if the guy's eye is swollen or his face is blowing up, he's still coming at you. And so that has got to be discouraging, especially for a power puncher, when you realize that none of my power punches are doing anything to this guy. And here he is, he's still here. And I got to try to keep this guy off. And so I feel strongly that Provodnikov's going to win this fight. And Provodnikov's going to knock Matthysse out probably around the 9th, 10th round, I would say. But I really think that this fight is gonna turn later in the fight because Matthysse is going to try to brawl. And I don't think he wants to do that. Even though I know he's got good power of his own, I just think that Provodnikov is just going to stalk him down, discourage him. And he's just an animal. And he's got that steel chin. And I see Provodnikov with a late knockout. So that'll be my prediction, that fight. But it's going to be amazing. I am so looking forward to that fight, just like I'm sure you are, just like every hardcore boxing fan is looking forward to that fight. And then, like I said, the backstory of the whole night on April 18th is going to be Chavez Fonfara. And so there's a lot of boxing coming up for the hardcore fans the next few weeks. And again, this is one of the most exciting times to be a boxing fan. We got Mayweather-Pacquiao about 3 weeks from now, which is going to be amazing. And we've got Matthysse Provodnikov coming up. And it's just going to be a great time. And I can't stress it enough how fortunate we are to get boxing back into some credibility and back into the mainstream with all these network fights. It was great to be able to watch a fight at 3 p.m, even though, I wasn't quite sold on it because I'm such a Saturday night boxing guy. And it was a little different to get into it at 3 o'clock, but it was nice to be able to be done with the fights by 5:30 instead of 12:30, 1 o'clock sometimes. So it was sort of a nice change of pace. So we'll definitely keep track and see how these afternoon fights go moving forward. Round by round. So we only got a couple rounds we'll talk about to finish up the podcast. Round 1. So they made an announcement this week that boxing is actually going to be on Sirius XM radio. So the Quillen and Lee fight and Garcia Peterson, the PBC fights this weekend, are actually going to be called live on Sirius XM. And you've got Randy, the Commish Gordon, and Jerry Cooney, who do the Sirius XM at the Fights radio show. So if you guys who are listening to this podcast, if you don't have Sirius XM on the Sports Zone channel, they have 2 boxing shows just dedicated to boxing. There's At the Fights, which is Randy G and Jerry Cooney. And I believe they do their show Monday and Friday. And then you've got Going the Distance with Teddy Atlas and Wally Matthews and Nabate Isles. And both are excellent shows. I enjoy both of them. I'm a huge Teddy Atlas fan. I know Teddy rubs some people the wrong way, but I'm a huge fan of Teddy Atlas. I think he's very insightful. I love how he motivates. And I love how on some of the Friday night fights when the fighter loses, twice this has happened recently, where they come over and they talk to Teddy and they apologize to him. And like Teddy gives them some words of wisdom. I love that. They should make that like a permanent part of the show where the loser of the fight comes over to talk to Teddy and then Teddy builds him back up again. I love that. But you should check it out if you can get Sirius XM or get it online. I know you got to pay for it, but if you definitely want some more sports radio that's just dedicated to boxing, there's 2 great shows there on Sirius XM. But to have boxing actually being called on the radio is another step forward. I know it doesn't translate as well as some of the other sports. Baseball translates the best on radio just because of the slow pace. Football is very good on the radio because of the pace of the game. Obviously, hockey is very difficult to pay attention to on the radio because it's too fast. Basketball, you can do it, but it's not as good as football or baseball. Soccer is you can't listen to soccer on the radio. It's impossible. But boxing, it'll be interesting to hear boxing back on the radio. I know that's the way it was done in the old days, and that's the way people listened to it if they weren't actually at the fight before TV started. And I think it's just another avenue of exposing the boxing to fans again. I mean, if you're a trucker or something in your car driving on a Saturday night, you can tune in and listen to the fights from your truck. I think that's awesome. And I think that's just another big step in terms of more platforms to get boxing out to the mainstream sports fan. So this round 2, Let's talk about Amir Khan. So Amir Khan this past week came out and was talking about how he's going to fight Chris Algieri on May 30th. But just in the last few days, that fight really hasn't been finalized yet. So I don't know if the Khan camp is having a change of heart because they heard the backlash, because everybody wants him to fight Kell Brook, or they want him to fight Broner. They want him in, and we all want him in bigger fights than Chris Algieri. Now, nothing against Chris Algieri, and I give that guy all the props in the world because, I thought he lost to Provodnikov, but he's taken that win and he's turned it into a Manny Pacquiao payday and now maybe an Amir Khan payday. So good for Chris Algieri. Go out and get all the money that you can get. But for Amir Khan to take that fight, it's just, again, it's the waiting game. It's, I'm going to wait and not test myself or risk getting a loss because I want to get in with Mayweather and Pacquiao. When little does Amir Khan know that if he goes and fights Kell Brook in June and beats him, he's got the fight. He's got the winner of Mayweather Pacquiao because that's what we're all going to want to see. We're going to demand that because he stepped up. He took care of his business. He beat who he had to beat. And now we're going to want to see him in there. And there will be no questions about who the next guy should be to fight the winner of Mayweather Pacquiao. But I don't think he gets that. Or maybe he's starting to get, maybe he's getting cold feet about Algieri. Maybe he's going to switch it up. Round 3. So Andre Ward, this week, he made the decision that he's going to come back in Oakland, California, in his hometown on June 20th. They haven't decided who his opponent's going to be yet, but I know we talked about in the last podcast about him saying he wouldn't go fight Froch in his hometown, but he might be open to fighting him in the UK. But he's going to have his comeback fight. He's been off for a while now, a long layoff, due to his surgery on his shoulder, I believe, and the promotional company. He's now with Rock Nation. But he comes back on June 20th. And the question really is he going to fight as a super middleweight or is he going to move up to light heavyweight? You know, he's done everything he can at super middleweight. He's cleaned out the division when he won the Super 6. He already beat Froch, which is really the only fight at super middleweight that makes any sense. Does he sit there and try to draw Golovkin up to 168 to fight him? Does he try to fight Chavez Jr. somewhere between 168 and 175? But it would be interesting to see Ward move up to light heavyweight with all the fighters in light heavyweight we already talked about. Beterbiev, Pascal, Kovalev, Stevenson. It would be really cool to see Andre Ward kind of jump into there. And those 3 top guys, Beterbiev and Kovalev and Stevenson, they all have punching power, and Andre Ward's more of a skilled technician boxer. So it really would be sort of a difference in their styles with those 4 top guys. So I'm hoping that Andre Ward, since he's already done everything he can at super middleweight, I'm hoping that he moves up to light heavyweight and goes for and tries to challenge some of those bigger guys, which would be really interesting. So before I end the podcast, I'm going to be going to the ESPN Friday Night Fight Boxino semifinals, which is going to be at the Sands Casino in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It's only about an hour from where I live, so I'm really excited to check it out. I'll be ringside covering the fight, so definitely follow me on Twitter at SSBS Boxing, and I'll live tweet. I'll send some pictures, show you where I'm at. So it really should be a great time. It's the semifinals of the heavyweights and the junior middleweights, and I believe these are 8-round fights in the semifinals. So I'm looking forward to being ringside for some live fighting action, and it should be a great time. And one other note before I end the podcast too is I wanted to talk about the transnational rankings. So the transnational rankings are rankings that are created by a bunch of boxing writers, strictly boxing writers from all around the world. So they have no bias towards promotional companies or to sanctioning bodies. And that I believe that these are the rankings that are the true rankings in each division. They're the rankings that this podcast will follow. And I suggest you take a look at it. If that's your thing, you like looking at the top 10 guys in each division, go to the transnational ratings, because nowadays you can't trust really any of the organizations and their rankings. You can't trust Ring Magazine because it's owned by Golden Boy. So I believe that these writers from around the world got it right. They come together because they love the sport. They put the rankings down. There is no bias. And you can really see who the top 10 guys are without a lot of the politics that are involved in a lot of the other rankings. So, and it's going to be, the champion can only lose the championship if he loses it in a championship fight, or if he moves weight classes or he retires. So there's not a lot of stripping the belts and things like that. It's all that nonsense is safe for the organization. So if you want to look at some ratings that are real and are a true reflection of really what's going on in each division, I would check out the transnational ratings. So that's about all the time I have on this podcast. Thanks a lot for all the positive feedback you've provided me. And please tweet me at SSBSBoxing. Follow me. You can follow the podcast there. You can get links to where all the shows are located. You can get the podcast now on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, AHA Radio. So there's a ton of platforms where you can get this podcast. And definitely tweet me. Let me know what you like, what you don't like. Send me any questions, comments. I'll definitely answer you back when I get a chance. So thanks again for the feedback. Thanks for listening. And again, this stretch of boxing we got in just the next 2 weeks is going to be great. So get your whiskey and your popcorn. Enjoy the fights, everyone. I'll talk to you soon.